Whitecat is an OSU player, and when I say player, I mean that he plays the game. He's one of the greatest players to ever touch OSU, and he built a legacy which will most certainly never be forgotten. Holding the #1 spot for the longest period in history, redefining what it means to aim, and in the process changing the game forever. His presence at the top almost became symbolic of true dominance, and with MREC's recent taking of the #1 spot, we saw an unprecedented celebration. Because Whitecat basically defined an entire era of the game, leaving a level of impact only rivaled by the likes of Kikizi. This is why I don't think the 10-minute video I made last year did justice to this truly legendary player, and the ridiculous impact that he's had on OSU. So, without further ado, here's the full story of a truly monolithic player. The history of Whitecat.
You just got fucking unbanned! You got it, boys! Whitecat gonna do it!
This story is going to begin long before Whitecat became who he is today, and even before he began OSU, in a place like many others in early 2014. In 2014, the world was in the midst of one of the biggest phenomena in gaming and just pop culture in general, the Minecraft craze. During this time, Whitecat was one of the people enthralled in this, and like many others, after becoming bored of the single-player section of the game, he began playing on some servers. And what really ended up catching his attention was a server called MCPvP. Because unlike a lot of other Minecraft servers, which were mainly casually focused, MCPvP was pretty intense. It had a super dedicated audience who would spend hundreds or even thousands of hours to get as good at Minecraft PvP as possible. This server also happened to have a pretty large overlap with other games of similarly dedicated audiences, one of which was OSU. And because of this, a couple of the best and most known OSU players actually came from MCPvP. A couple notable ones are Arson, BTMC, and most importantly for this video, Whitecat, who was introduced to OSU on the server, but never got around to playing it much because he was, well, too busy playing MCPvP. This meant an entire year would pass after he downloaded the game before he would actually start playing for real. And it's likely that he never really would have started, if not for one massive event. And that was MCPvP's premature demise in May of 2015.
Guys, this is the end of MCPvP.
This would cause a mass migration to a couple of games, one of which was obviously OSU. And with this mass migration away from MCPvP, Whitecat would officially become an active player. After leaving MCPvP, Whitecat would come to OSU and begin playing mainly for fun, but also often in friendly rivalships that kept his motivation for the game high. It's a really normal way to begin your OSU career, something which most certainly could not be said for how he was playing the game, since while mainly just playing for fun, he would improve at a rate that may be truly unmatchable. A historically absurd rise that would eventually come to bite him. But at the time, he only reaped its rewards, going from 100 to 300 PP in 3 months, and in less than a year after that, getting his first 400, which is even more impressive when you realize that at this time, 400 were still not all that common. What might be even more notable than how quickly he achieved this, though, was that he did it all in around 25,000 play count, which, to put in perspective, is faster than Lifeline and even MREC. Yeah, to say Whitecat was a fast learner would be an understatement. A more accurate description might be a freak of nature, a prodigy who redefined every single convention set by players from before, during, and even after his time. On top of this technical skill, he'd found a talent for reading easy DT. And his skill had kept becoming more and more impressive to the point where it was at the upper echelon of what had been done in the game before. But before this was noticed too much, his skill at aim would be broadcast for everyone to see, with his first ever score post. This was for a #1 score on the at the time qualified Quaver, a score which would still be top 50 on the map to this day. Let me repeat, at 13, with less than 40k play count, Whitecat was 3-missing the long version of Quaver. It wasn't normal. And since he wasn't getting any worse, he would get a couple more score posts over the next month. One for his Kazukache Diamond FC, another for his #5 score on High Score, and one more for his Flow Grando FC, which also happened to be his first 500. All of these are extremely popular maps, and he was getting top 5 or even top 1 scores. which is why these plays being appreciated for what they were was quite surprising for someone with as absurd a profile as Whitecat. The reason for this tameness would become clear a bit later though. For now, after proving his aim capabilities, Whitecat was about to set out on... Low AR reading has always been one of Whitecat's strongest skills, and unlike his aim at the time, his easy DT skill was, in 2 words, legitimately unignorable. But this is only half of the storm that was about to hit him, because with an extremely low play count and an extremely high proficiency for reading, he could only be considered one thing: a reading prodigy. This was in almost every way more suspicious than being an aim prodigy, because for the longest time there's been a pretty popular idea that there are no reading prodigies. Like, we just got through the Loki Chaos situation, and in that case it was proved entirely right. And in almost every case it has been. Which would make the fact that at 40k play count, he would FC Don Don with easy DT and then self-score posted on Reddit a clear ticking time bomb. And when he posted this, a flip basically switched, and everyone was against him. And the thing is, you can't even really blame them. No one in their right mind would believe that after so many examples of people claiming to be easy prodigies and being outed as complete frauds, one who not only improved faster than most of these prodigies, but also self-posted their own score, and so clearly wanted attention, was legit. And this score was torn apart because of this. What is important though, is at the time the evidence against him really did boil down to he improved too fast. But at the same time, the evidence for him was just as weak. Everything would clearly come down to his live plays. The first of which would fittingly be on Don Don with easy DT, where he would be able to nearly replicate his score with a bad camera angle, and then get a worse score with a better camera angle. The thing that many people were looking for in this live play was time warping, or essentially playing the game at a slower speed and then speeding up a video after. And in the grand scheme of things, this live play does a pretty good job of proving his legitimacy. I don't know if I'd call this a huge feat, because, well, Whitecat was legit, and so everything about this video being lined up perfectly is just to be expected. But with the complete lack of inconsistencies in the video, people surely believed him. Right? Yeah, no. I think Spaz's comment under this sorta says everything, since he replied with "sorry, but the hand cam looks really sped up." And before anyone says, "but there's a clock," just look at this. It's pretty easy to fake it if you even know the basics about video editing, which he clearly does. Wow, Spaz of post and cringe. But in all seriousness, this take is hot garbage. It pretty well shows the amount of ignorance that people were using to keep themselves convinced that Whitecat wasn't legit. I mean, the clock Whitecat uses analog, not digital, which makes it far harder to fake. And on top of this, nothing is proved by what he said. Like, let's say that clocks are really easy to fake. Well, okay, that's a cool fact, but it also says nothing about this live play. And this just about summarizes the comment section under this live play, in that while there was nothing wrong with it, people wanted much more evidence before they would let him be legit. And the next live play would be met with pretty similar response, and even less attention. He would then finally use what should have been a pretty surefire way to prove his legitimacy: a handcam stream. And these streams, while not being perfect, were also not that bad. There was definitely a bit of delay between his handcam and monitor, but not much else was wrong with them. So what did people do? Well, they either ignored this part, or made up something like, well, the handcam is synced, so it doesn't prove anything. It's all really witch hunty in hindsight. After this, he would continue uploading live plays, in hopes of clearing his name. But as time went on, these would just receive less and less attention, and people almost just seemed to be ignoring him. And this likely would have stayed the case for a very long time, if not for one catastrophic event. When in November of 2016, Whitecat was banned. One thing that really surprised me was that in the support email he received, they said that he was banned for cheating behavior. This throws an entire another wrench in the situation. But it didn't matter too much because he did multi-account and boost other people's accounts, which are both bannable offenses. But everyone obviously believed that he was cheating because of the reputation he had. One of the most frustrating things about this, though, is that Whitecat told everyone that he was banned for multi-accounting. And because support doesn't say why someone is banned, he had no proof of it. And so obviously everyone thought he was lying, which is just the first in a couple of really frustrating parts about this story. But now gas had basically been thrown on the Whitecat witch hunt dumpster fire. And so this would lead to his 2 most controversial and hated live plays. The 2 that I think truly doomed him in the long run. First, we'll take a look at his live play on Monster, which looks perfectly fine for the vast majority of its runtime, until it reaches the ending, where Whitecat did this. When looking at this, I still always think it's sped up, and I even got so convinced to the point where I was trying to figure out why he'd speed up only the end of the video. But it really was just the result of adrenaline. I would say that at this point, he was truly doomed. Not because none of the previous things mattered, but instead because this is the point of no return. Like now, no matter what he did, with a suspicious looking live play, a crazy low playtime, and a ban from the main server, there wasn't much he could do to actually prove that he was legit. But he would do his absolute best, uploading one last live play, the legendary Proof I'm Legit. If you look at this from an outside perspective, you might think that this is what doomed him. It both got him banned from the private server that he was playing on up to this point, and became one of the most controversial posts of all time on r/osugame. But the comments under it tell a sort of different story, since none of them really say much about this live play, because it's actually quite good. He did everything they wanted, but what he was met with was 100+ comments about how all of his other live plays were hacked. There's a lot to unpack in these comments, so let's get into it. First, his keyboard sounds wrong. And he did a stream during a jump section. This is a completely reasonable thing to be suspicious about, but it also has a really simple explanation. In that he actually tapped 5 times at all. The audio is really just him bottoming out his keys because he's tapping harder during the harder section of the map. Which is why it's so annoying that so many people are harping on this as being the end-all be-all of evidence against him. And then there are the big ones. The first of these is that his cursor teleports during his monster live play. And this one is so weak. It's the only one that really hits me as blatantly witch hunty. Since if you watch the video slowed down, you could see him make the movements you see on screen exactly. And then move his body forward, blocking the pen so you can't see him move the cursor to its resting position. The thing is that either of these would likely not have been enough to convince people. But there was one more thing. And those were the two seemingly unexplainable parts of his live plays. Which are, 1, at the end of his monster live play, Whitecat tabbed out of the map without pressing any buttons. And 2, on the Natsukoi Hanabi live play, he tabs out and another score pops up. This looks really weird, and unlike the others, common logic can't explain it, since both of them were actually caused by glitches. We now know this, but you can't really blame people for believing them at the time, right? Well, I kinda beg to differ. Since for each one of these, we have to ask the question, what does this mean? And the implication from people claiming that this part of the live play was edited is pretty clear. It's that Whitecat either edited different gameplay onto his screen, or running a cheat that has this as its side effect. The first is ridiculous, unless we assume that Whitecat is a Hollywood-level VFX editor. The reflections are perfect, the way the screen looks is perfect. Everything about it lines up way too well to have been done by an amateur. And the second would mean that he was using a cheat that no other person had used or has used since, because this bug has not been shown in any other cheater's live plays. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that these are completely empty claims that don't prove or disprove anything. Somehow I feel like I'm getting a bit of deja vu here. But despite this, when people came into this live play thinking that Whitecat was cheating and then saw all of this quote-unquote evidence against him, it would just become crystal clear to them that he was not a legit player. And the fallout from this live play would reflect this reaction, when he was banned off the private server he was playing on, and then basically shunned from any public appearances. This was the true lowest point for him, when the people who believed in his legitimacy could be counted on like one hand. So, after losing everything, his account, his credibility, and seemingly his chances of ever coming back, what would he do? With basically nothing left, Whitecat would migrate to Qatari with the help of Firedigger, who was one of his last supporters at this time. He'd actually played a lot on a different private server before this and accumulated about 25,000 play count. He He'd improved a lot because of this, and one score that represents pretty well how good he'd gotten was his FC on Chisana no Uda with Hidden Hard Rock, which would have been the number 1 on Bancho and still the number 2 to this day. This is from a burst of motivation right after being banned, but after this he would barely play for the next year. Yeah, you heard that right. Between late 2017 and late 2018, Whitecat would barely touch the game, with his new account on Guitari only ever reaching 15,000 play count. He clearly lost a huge amount of motivation because of his ban. One of the biggest questions for me though was always, why? Why was he banned not only longer than you would be for multi-accounting or boosting other accounts, but longer than you'd be banned for cheating by an entire year? And he wasn't not unbanned for a lack of trying, that's for sure. Every 3 months, which is the minimum amount of time for an appeal, he would send another ban appeal. Meaning that over time, he sent in at least 10 separate appeals, and every single one of them was rejected. He was never given a reason why, it just happened. Like, he'd made multiple live plays, he'd streamed, he'd done everything. And yet the player base and OSU support seemed to be firmly against him. And this seemed to be what truly made him lose hope, since it would begin his year-long hiatus, which would only end in the middle of 2019, when he once again wanted to attempt being unbanned. This period of about 4 months between when he came back and when he was actually unbanned is really interesting to me, since I was watching his first stream, and he was a mid to low top 50 player. Like, he tried Fiery's difficulty of Quaver with 3 mod, and he got 80% on it. He's now gotten 99% on the map with the same mods. So what the hell happened in those 4 months? Whitecat's return to playing OSU in early 2019 is really interesting for a couple of reasons. First, because of how average player he really was by this point. Whereas in 2016 and 17 he distinguished himself with top 50 aim and some of the best easy DT players in the game, with those exact same skill sets and skill levels he'd been passed by a huge number of players. After just a couple of weeks of playing actively though, he would begin to distinguish himself. For his skills, he was strong in DT. And in what was most definitely his best play at the time, he achieved the first ever DTFC on that weird circle monochrome butterfly, and also FC'd Fiery's Guess Who's Back. But overall, none of his DT plays from early 2019 even cracked 800 PP, and there weren't many exceptional plays outside of monochrome butterfly. He did also have a lot of really impressive no-mod and hard rock scores though, like the first ever FC on the Awaken diff of Yoka to Yume Etsuetsu, and a Songs Comp FC which was 5 PP away from his first 800. I also don't want to downplay his skill too much, especially because just a few weeks after this, he had scores like a Kikizi snipe on high score of all things. A couple of things to remember from this time though, are that he couldn't read Air 11, not even close. And his aim was good, but nothing exceptional. And overall, he was generally pretty well rounded. This wouldn't remain the case for long though, because Whitecat had essentially been sitting on an absurd amount of potential for 3 years. And it was finally starting to come out. Since after becoming acclimated with the game again, he would start trying faster maps, and in late April of 2019, he would show just how good he had the chance to get, when he got the first DTFC on the extra diff of Black Rover. Yes, even before Azerite, who was top 10 at the time. This was a score Vaxe, Rafis, and Firebat hadn't been able to achieve, and it was his first 800 as well. He would then FC the top diff of Guess Who's Back, which would have been the first DTFC on Bancho. He would then get his first ever 900 PP play on Fiery's diff of Anime Band before it was ranked on Bancho. This had already been done by Flying Tuna, but it showed how he kept realizing more and more the massive potential he had. But he's still yet to have a true magnum opus, a play that set him apart from everyone else at the time. Especially because as his aim kept getting better, it became increasingly more and more clear that he'd be able to set something unmatchable. And this would all come to fruition, when after being active for a couple of months, he'd finally get a truly legendary score. A Milk Crown Hidden Hard Rock 4 miss. Imagine getting less misses with Hard Rock than anyone else had on the map. On a map which was 0.1 stars away from 10 stars. This score is stupid. It's still unmatched to this day, even by Whitecat himself. If he'd been unbanned at the time, it would have been the score that made people reconsider what kind of a player he was. Like, what on earth even is this? This is the moment for me that Whitecat became so much more than your average top 50 or even top 10 player. Because while this play didn't technically break any barriers, it's not a stretch at all to say that it was the best aim play in the game. When just months after he started playing actively, he set something like that, that's when it became crystal clear just the kind of potential that he had. To realize his potential fully outside of love maps though, Whitecat would need to work on a few things. High AR, speed, and stamina. These were the three things he seemed to struggle the most on in comparison to other top players. The high AR reading actually wasn't bad at all, but since 3-mod would eventually become such an important part of how he played, it being in such a weak state, in hindsight, was clearly a hindrance. And so his AR-11 practice during this time would become extremely important. And then there was speed, where he fell far behind Vaxe, Karthi, and even Igki, who were the ones it was becoming increasingly clear he'd be competing with. And then in terms of stamina, after not playing for such a long time, it seemed like he'd lost a ton of it. And he struggled a lot with accuracy in longer, higher BPM streams. So, between June when he came back and September, would he manage to change these things? Well, yeah. There's a pretty stark difference in his streams between these two periods. When you look at mid-2019, it's clear that he has a lot going for him. But he's fairly inconsistent, and he would sometimes go multiple streams without any really impressive scores. But by September, he's choking a Wizard's Tower 1000 PP play, then choking the logger version of Monochrome Butterfly, and getting the lowest miss count up to that point. Then 3 missing Fiery's Colorful for like 800 PP, and then 1 missing the top diff of Make a Move, which at that point had no FCs. And he would do things of that magnitude just about every stream. But when this difference in skill truly became clear was in one score. A play that defined him growing into his strengths, and what may have been his best play at the time. His Wizard's Tower 1000 PP play. This changed things. It reclassified him as a player. Only 2 other people had a 1000 PP play at this point, and now someone who's basically unknown just did it offline. In these few months, he took shape as a player and laid the groundwork for one of the most memorable events in Osu's history. An event which marked a shift in the game's meta, the start of an era, and the redefinition of what it meant to be good at aim. The situation that Whitecat was in the days leading up to his unban were peculiar, to say the least. On Boncho, he would have technically been number 3 in terms of PP. And when I asked him what he thought his actual skill level is, at the time he believed number 2 might be doable. And at the same time as all of this, he was still streaming to basically no one. But there were just a few people who'd stuck with him throughout this time. The 3 most pivotal being Firedigger, Skill, and My Angel Aku. The most important one up to this point had most certainly been Firedigger. He was the only one who gave Whitecat a platform after he was banned twice on other servers. He had also been one of the only people who trusted him since the beginning. This probably should have given him some leverage for gaining back favor in the community. But sadly, just as the Whitecat situation was unfolding, another incident happened.
Yes, I've analyzed it and it's not really that suspicious. You can ironize as much as you want, but I'm willing to believe that this play is legit.
Yeah, Firedigger would give Whitecat and Legendary the same treatment, and since Legendary was, well, less than legit, Firedigger really didn't have the ability to change anyone's mind. And this had stayed the case for the last 3 years. Throughout these years, My Angel Aku had also spent a lot of time defending Whitecat. He was like Whitecat's ride or die. He'd spent the last 3 years arguing tooth and nail for Whitecat's legitimacy, despite no one believing him. Like in legit every Whitecat thread, he was there defending him. And then Skill, who had known of Whitecat and tried to convince others of his legitimacy for years, but had never been super public about it. In these three, Skill had something the others didn't. And that was a high profile in the community and long-lasting ties with top players. When Whitecat was originally banned, he was one of the people convinced that he was cheating. But after finding him at the #1 spot in a couple of private servers, he began advocating for Whitecat's legitimacy. Although at that time it was mainly behind closed doors. In August, he went public with it though. With a tweet that read, "Please unban Whitecat, it's sad that the literal top 5 player has been banned for 3 years." This would create a bit of a stir. But a little over a month later, towards the end of September, Skill would tweet out again, with some much more extensive proof and a request to retweet to spread awareness. It gained a lot of attention very quickly, and with some high-profile retweets, it was able to reach Peppy himself. And although Peppy had to get in one last obnoxious tweet before it could happen, Whitecat would finally be unbanned.
What the fuck is going on in chat?
Dude, you just got fucking unbanned!
What? No.
After 3 years, 15 appeals, and being banned twice, Whitecat would finally be able to play on Boncho. But before setting his first score, he said,
Okay, let's go on to farming, guys. I don't know if I still have the stamina, but I'll try.
He would then go on to play for 4 hours, and in the process, change the course of the game's history forever. The stream started off pretty slow. He struggled a bit on some pretty easy maps, but he picked up pace quickly. FCing Fiery's diff on Quaver, then Hime, and then literally out of nowhere, in like 3 attempts, he FC'd Union.
Rip Ack, but fuck it.
Bitte.
Yes!
This was his second highest PB play ever at the time, and it got people to understand that they weren't just dealing with a normal top 10 or even top 5 contender, but someone who could potentially rival Vaxe at the top of the game. He would then follow this score with a Songs Comp FC and a myriad of 700 PB plays in a quantity that had never really been seen before this point. It skyrocketed him in a single day to becoming one of the most popular figures in the community. It's also very clear that at this point, Whitecat was still a developing player. He was still struggling with 3mod, and he didn't even play any maps over 300 BPM. But despite this, he'd reached number 109 in just a single day. This absurd show of skill also gave people a lot of questions. The biggest of which had to be, is Whitecat a DT1 trick? It was reasonable enough, seeing as every play he'd set on the 22nd was with DT. And on the main server, he'd really yet to show any potential on Hard Rock, No Mod, or even Reading. Finding the answer to these questions, as well as watching someone who seemed to have a top 3 level of skill, was what motivated thousands of people to tune into his stream the next day, where he would once again do things that no one else besides maybe Vaxe was. He got like 5 1000 plus combo runs on Tsukinami in a row, and he even got a 2-miss run. Then in like 2 tries, he FC'd Connie Do Luck for 860 PP. He then 1-missed Wizard's Tower with 1000 PP AC. He'd follow this with an 890 PP score on Guess Who's Back, then 846 PP on Colorful, and then a 3-miss on the 9.64 star Immortal Flame, which is 7 stars without DT. And overall, he'd play for 2.5 hours and peak at 6k viewers, becoming one of the biggest players in the game, and reaching number 27. 2 days later, he would once again start up his game. And in his best day yet, he would FC Yume Chizu, becoming the first person after 3 years to beat Kukizi's choke, and then he'd also FC One Hope Sniper, which is a ridiculous 700, and one of the first to be done with no mod. It also seemed like he just couldn't stop getting 700s, on seemingly every map he played. There were at least 8 in just the 3 hours he played that day. And because of this, he'd reached his biggest milestone yet, entering the top 10. This is where it should have become hard. The top 10 was on a different level than everyone else, and especially as he approached number 1, it started to seem like even Whitecat would have trouble. since at the time, Vaxei had the biggest PP lead in the history of the game. Everyone wanted to see just how close he could get to the top. And with players like Vaxei at the top who had multiple 1000 PP plays, it seemed like he still had a lot to prove. He himself only believed that it was possible to reach number 2 because of this. But this certainty that Vaxei would hold the number 1 spot would get put into question the next day. And this can be placed squarely on one thing. He put on 3-mod, and then became a farming god. With a Connie Luck 3-mod score for 938 PP, Fiery's Lonely Go 3-mod for 904 PP, and even Black Rover Extra Difficulty 3-mod for 958 PP, and his new top play. This would bring him to number 7 by the end of the day, and also give him the record for by far the most 900s ever set in a single day. He would then boot up his stream the next day, just to outdo himself. There's really only one score you need to understand why this day was so out of the ordinary. Team Magma 3-mod, S rank.
Fuck off. Holy fuck! Holy shit.
This is one of those scores that no other player could do. That no player could even dream of.
God.
No one had passed the map with these mods. And he'd 3-modded it. He wasn't just good, or even top 3 material. But in certain categories of play, he was years ahead of everyone else. That day he also got 972 PP on Guess Who's Back, 950 on Connie Do, and 806 in the top diff of Black Rover, which was far, far outside everyone else's skill set. He went from number 7 to number 4 in a single day, a spot which he overall reached in just 5 days. He'd boot up his stream a bit later and play in a multi-lobby. But 3 days later, he'd come back and show everyone just how capable he was of the number 1 spot, getting 3 separate 900s in a single day and making it all the way to the number 2 spot. Which really just left him with one more thing he needed to do before he'd truly make it clear that he was worthy of the number 1 spot. A 1000 PP play. Despite everything, Whitecat had still yet to set a 1000 PP play. And while he put in a lot of good attempts and shown that it was probably possible, it was definitely the one big thing setting him apart from Vaxei. And later this stream, he'd start putting in attempts on Lonely Go. This map really is boiled down to a 10-second diff spike at the end. And when he first started trying it, it seemed pretty unlikely, since he was failing there most of the time. And then, after that, he got Mind Block on the beginning. And overall, it looked really bleak.
Yes, holy shit, that's good.
Until he got this
Dot,
run.
Thank you so much for subbing. Holy shit!
He ended this day at number 2, and at this point he was finally approaching the last hurdle. Vaxei's massive, unmatched lead in terms of PP. He had 2 1Ks, and he'd made it clear that he was in a different caliber than everyone else playing on Boncho before this point. And he had a variety of skills and plays that Whitecat was just not able to compete with his accuracy on normal DT maps being far ahead of Whitecat's. But Whitecat had something else up his sleeve, and that was his unmatched ability to gain performance points.
Guys, fucking pray. I don't fucking care. I don't care. It's still so much, I think. Yep. We did it, boys. Come on, take me to the top. Got it, boys!
Whitecat reached number 1 just 14 days after his unban, and to say it made waves throughout the community would be a massive understatement. He had both gained a huge amount of notoriety, and with this, gained a lot of people who didn't like the attention he was getting. One thing a lot of people really assumed at this point was that he was a DT one trick, which was an easy conclusion to come to, seeing as most of his impressive plays at the time were with DT. But in a lot of people who expressed this opinion, there was also a sense of denial. I would know since the time I was one of them. And I think this can be most clearly felt through the comments on an Idkey clip, where Idkey had basically said that he thought Whitecat's stream was boring because he only farmed. He made it pretty clear in the clip that he didn't think this was all Whitecat could do, but that it was all he was doing at the time. A lot of people didn't seem to get this though. And so some of the comments are pretty naive and kind of hilarious to look back on. Like, one guy said it would be cool if he could set scores like Euphoria or Sound Chimera. Because unlike Idkey, he could obviously never do those scores. But this also puts pretty well what else Whitecat still had to prove. Because while obviously he's at the #1 spot now, he'd still yet to show skill in many things besides farming. And since he'd reached #1, he would finally have the chance to prove this. Over the week after he hit #1, Whitecat wouldn't play much. But upon his return on the 10th of October, he would warm up a bit before putting in some attempts on Team Magma. He'd played the map a fair bit in the weeks prior, after his S rank, which at the time may have been his most impressive score. But seeing as he only had one 1k, it seemed unlikely that he'd get another run with that kind of luck, since the map would give 1.1k PP if he FC'd it. He seemed to think differently though, since he'd put in many attempts after. Sadly though, he'd basically been mind-blocking the map since. But after this week break, when he came back to the map, he did this.
Shit.
He set his magnum opus play at the time, taking the PP record, getting the first 1.1k, and doing it all only 3 weeks after being unbanned. Even looking over everything before this point, this score is absurd. It was unmatched by every other player in the game, and completely out of even Whitecat's league just a couple weeks ago. With this score, he cemented himself as having far and away the best jump aim in the game. And while it certainly wasn't proving him as a diverse player, it did prove to everyone just how unique of a player he still was. Finally though, after this, he seemed to be satisfied with where he was, and he could finally stop farming, which would give him the opportunity to prove everything else. With the #1 score on Solus 4 and then a 3 miss on Warriors with Hidden, before going back to farming for like an hour and then choking a 10-star FC. He really wasn't doing himself any favors with how good he was at aim, since those scores would always overshadow everything else he did. But as the weeks went by, he'd play more and more outside of aim, and he would improve a ton. And finally, by the end of October, he seemed to finally be finding his groove, when he FC'd Tengaku. It's definitely an aim map, but I don't think it's an overstatement to say that the hardest part was the speed aspect, which certainly set it apart at this time from his other scores. And then after this, he would choke One Hope Sniper with HDHR. This play makes no sense. There still was a Nomad FC outside of his, and on top of this, only a few people even passed the map with Hidden Hard Rock. He just 2-missed it. And then, only a week later, he did this. Again, he is not doing himself any favors by being this good at aim, especially when he followed this with a Milk Crown 9-star FC. Literally mental. He also pocketed himself $250, so it was probably worth it as well. Also, that accuracy, it just doesn't make sense. Over time, it's easy to get desensitized when you repeatedly see dominance like this on aim. But he really did get the best act by an entire percent, while seeing one of the most popular aim maps in the entire game. Throughout this section, I've still mainly been talking aim, but that doesn't mean he wasn't playing a whole lot of stream maps. Actually, it was the opposite. He was playing a ton of them, and he'd gotten way better. Now, it is important to note that before this point, Whitecat was not bad at both stream speed and aim, but over this time, he'd obviously gotten better at both of those. Where this practice really counted though, was in stamina. Since before this point, while Whitecat wasn't awful at stamina, in comparison to people like Vaxe, or especially Idkey, it was abysmal. And this is where his training had really paid off. Since while it still wasn't mind-blowing, it gave him the wiggle room to show off his already great flow aim. I think the score that best shows how big of a transformation he'd had is most certainly his Sound Chimera one, where he managed to get the best accuracy on the leaderboards of a map that's basically just streams. And this newfound stream skill led him to set his sights on one of the most sought after scores in the entire game. A Euphoria FC. Nearly every top player had tried with this score, but every single one of them had been stopped by one fact. And that is that Euphoria doesn't just need jump or flow aim, but it needs an exceptionally high level of both. Because after some pretty easy streams in the beginning, it has a ridiculously difficult jump section. It's 8-star jump aim, and it made it impossible for most stream players to set the score. But with how simple the streams before this were, most aim players would have probably had a pretty good chance on it. The problem was that the map doesn't just end there. It has a very long stream section at the end that is by no means ridiculously hard, but also by no means as easy. It goes super spaced at a couple parts, and it even has follow points. And this is why it sort of perfectly fit in to the player that Whitecat was becoming. A score to almost prove his well-roundedness. And that's exactly what he did. The second highest no-mod PvP play, and one that had been sought after by a huge number of players, and even grinded by Idkey. And yet, Whitecat would be the first FC, hitting not only the 280 BPM jumps, but also the extremely spaced streams at the end. Around this time, I and a lot of other people still sort of thought of Whitecat as a DT1 trick. But this score changed things. He wasn't just good at streams, he was exceptional at them. And there was basically no way to deny anymore just how good he was. To this day, the score is still mind-blowing since everyone on the leaderboards has more than 5 misses. So, where do you go from here? After setting most of the best aim plays in the game, both in terms of jump and now even some flow aim, what do you do next? Well, if you're Whitecat, you just keep getting better. Whitecat would keep the stamina grind up while also pulling off some pretty nice aim scores. His stream practice meant that 210 and even 220 were now completely inside of his comfort zone. And this, combined with his aim, gave him scores like Angreifer, which no other stream players had managed to pull off. It was pretty clear that in terms of streaming, he was now more than proficient, and he was going to be able to set some pretty impressive scores. Despite this anticipation though, no one could have possibly expected him to pull off one of the most impressive flow aim scores of all time, while also breaking one of the longest curses in Osu history. But that's just what he did. Whitecat can FC Road of Resistance with Hard Rock. He ended a 3-year-long curse and concluded it in the most satisfying way possible, with literal god tier accuracy that was 1% above the second best in the map. He wasn't just able to play streams anymore, instead, he was at the forefront of them. But despite this ridiculous show of skill, there was one thing he was still lacking in: 220 BPM plus stamina. He was able to stream it, but instead of the god tier act he could get on anything below that BPM, he struggled much more with both the aiming and tapping parts in maps like Yomiuri. One other thing that he decided to double down on during this time was diversifying his aim. Since while in terms of comfortable aim, it was nearly unmatched, when it came to less comfortable aim, it was just not quite on the same level. But before he started out grinding on these skill sets, he went back and did just a little farming. It's honestly comical just how little he has to try. He was not playing the same game as everyone else, switching from ridiculous play to ridiculous play every time he streamed. And while during the bulk of 2020 he would still play a lot of 3-mod aim, he would also diversify a huge amount in the maps he played. And by the middle of the year, he'd set 3 1k PP plays, all on 3-mod farm maps. But more significantly, he got scores like a tool-assisted speed core, hidden hard rock 30 miss, the first DTA rank on Airman, an embryo hard rock FC for 800 PP, a songs comp FC for 800 PP, and a dive bomb hidden hard rock score, are just a few plays that showed him in a very different light. All throughout, he was also getting much better at higher BPM stamina, reading, and aim control, which would cause these months to seem a whole lot slower, but it would pay off big time, since he'd reached the point where 220 was almost completely inside of his comfort zone. And I think his thought process probably went something like, what's the most legendary 220 BPM map? And that's how he set his sights on a Yomiuri score. But at the same time, Yomiuri was one of the most played maps in the entire game, and Whitecat had really just picked up 220 stamina. So it seemed unlikely that he'd go and set the #1 score or something, right? Well, this score is absurd. He picked up 220 and then did this somehow. It showed a ridiculous amount of skill and talent, and it's basically the perfect score to show the player that he was becoming. Someone not just proficient in comfortable aim, but instead someone who'd built on this aim skill to enable him to do scores that no one else could even fathom. Oh, by the way, he also got 1.1k and his new top play on the new anime ban, and a 3-mod FC on the newly ranked Imagination, for nearly the same amount. Just Whitecat things, right? I also think it's really interesting when you see how quickly he improved after his unban to think about something else. Like, a lot of people talk about what would have happened if someone like Mathy kept playing during the time that he quit because of community pressure. But what about Whitecat if he never got banned? Like, because of his ban, he legitimately didn't play during the most formative years for him as a player. And with the ridiculous amount of catching up he did after his unban, I feel like it's clear that the potential he had was, and kinda still is, the most the game has ever seen. And especially when we've seen Emrek come into his own in the way he has over the last couple months, it really makes you think, since Whitecat really did start out improving just as fast. Okay, tangent over. Point is that after his unban, Whitecat had seemed to become an entirely different player. One that was not only skilled at jump aim, but now a much wider range of aim, on top of also being very skilled at stamina. And at this point, there were really 2 major things that he needed to do. To keep improving at what he was already doing, and prepare for the Osu World Cup, and what would essentially be his first tournament performance. As the months went on, a lot changed. For one, his aim got a whole lot better, which can be entirely summed up by one ridiculous score. The best aim play in the game, and one of the best snipes ever.
Holy shit.
What a funny guy, sniping the previous best aim play in the game, with what a lot of people considered to be the best. Other scores he would get would include a Galaxy Collapse 6 miss, which was only the best in the map by 50. Also an S rank on Fiery's 9-star Happy Song, getting the best miscount by 6 and choking 1.1k PP with no mod. He would also continue to reap the benefits of his now extremely solid stamina, with, you know, a Yomiuri FC for 960 PP. Oh, and remember when I said that it wasn't clear if uncomfortable aim was really his strong suit? Well, he'd do this. This is basically Osu equivalent to that guy who solved integrals for 8 hours. Like, the aim control and just aim in general required for this map are ridiculous. And I just want to remind you that just a couple months before this, people were saying that it'd be cool if he could play anything outside of 3 mod. This time in mid-2020 would end up marking Whitecat's peak in terms of pure domination of his skill sets. It was a time when there was no question about who the best aim player in the game was. And many even began to compare his seemingly massive reach and absurd amount of unique plays to Kakizi. He had the largest PP gap in history, and he held it without even trying. It's no exaggeration to say that he was the face of the game and the biggest celebrity had seen since Kakizi. This is all amazing, but the word peak is important here, since this point would mark the start of a break for Whitecat and somewhat the end of the Whitecat era. After his mid-year pop-off, Whitecat would definitely slow down a fair bit. Well, except for, you know, Goodbye Moonmen happening. Just casually setting the second highest star non-cheesed FC, at only 0.6 stars away from a 10-star FC. But after this, he'd play very little for the next couple of months, which would cause him to lose a lot of his speed and stamina, which seemed pretty worrying in the lead up to the World Cup. But importantly, his aim was definitely still there. Like, for God's sake, he got the first 10-star FC during this time. Still, this point would mark a massive slowdown in Whitecat's scores, and it also came right before he was going to get the chance to prove the final thing he hadn't had the chance to after his unban, his tournament performance in the biggest Osu event of the year, in the Osu World Cup. He hadn't been able to participate in any tournaments before this point, because after you're unbanned, you have to wait a year before you can play in a single one. And so, while only playing a couple official tournaments before his ban, Whitecat was about to play his first one since his unban in the biggest tournament of the year. Before it started, there were a lot of rumors about his tournament skill, since while he'd proved to be fairly versatile in aim, in many skill sets he hadn't shown much of anything. Like, there wasn't anything saying that he wasn't good at low AR hidden reading, but he also didn't have any scores that showed that he was. This meant everything sort of came down to this one event, but with his first tournament being the biggest tournament of the year, it also raised a lot of questions. Since he'd never been in a tournament of this caliber before, was he going to get super nervous and fall apart? And would his aim even hold up in a tournament setting? But still, when it was revealed that he'd be part of the German team, people got really excited. Especially because of how the German team had been gaining momentum over the last few years. And Whitecat just seemed to be the cherry on top, since they'd hovered near the top in 2018 and 19, but had been just shy of the top both times. And they already had a pretty insane roster, with Dustus, who had always been the standout player on the team, as one of the best tournament players in the game, and someone who got even stronger on the harder pools. Okinamo, a space stream god. Umbre. I don't know if you've heard of Umbre, he's kind of good at getting accuracy on streams. And finally, Hallowatcher, a very good all-around player who was especially good at hidden hard rock. But this team had a problem, in that while all of them were great, and Dustus was consistently a contender for one of the best players in the tournament, many of them had still yet to come fully into their own. But in 2020, Umbre had done his thing. Okinamo had gone from a space stream god to being one of the most skilled speed players in the entire tournament on top of that. And now they got the #1 player in the game, who, if nothing else, should be able to prop up their roster in a huge way into later pools, as the maps get harder as the tournament goes on. This was where he was predicted to really shine, since it's where many players' technical ability becomes their ceiling. This was where Germany had failed before, And so, Whitecat gave him a critical piece to play. On top of this, the German team gained Neox, who was an extremely strong aim and high AR asset, which filled another hole from their 2019 team. And this stacked roster got a lot of people thinking, and hoping, that maybe, for the first time in 2 years, they might actually be able to give the US a run for their money. Like in the last year, when they got 4th, it was really quite good. But in the top 2 spots, there was a critical difference, in that one team was able to 7-0 a team that had already beaten Germany by a decent amount. It was a legitimately boring match to watch, since there really wasn't a competition. If you were betting on a US match, the biggest question would be if the other team could even score a single point. They didn't just have 4 players that could outcompete everyone. No, they had the undisputed 2 best tournament players in the game, along with probably the majority of the top 10. It wasn't even funny. While people certainly had high hopes for the German team, saying they would beat the US was still a bit far-fetched. So with all of this in mind, the World Cup began. Germany would place 4th in the qualifiers with a performance that wasn't bad, but one that also in no way proved them to be a very special team. The US, Canada, and Poland would all outperform them, meaning they had a lot to prove in their matches. Germany's first match was against the 29th seed, Turkey, and it went about as expected.
Germany going to be winning this match 5-0.
5-0 will never not be a great score, but at the same time, it doesn't prove that much. Germany's second match was against the 20th seed, Indonesia, and this one was a roller coaster. Germany would start off by getting a 3-1 lead over Indonesia, which seemed like it would end in a pretty expected 5-1 victory. But Indonesia would then proceed to win the next 3 matches, giving them the lead and bringing them to within 1 point of defeating Germany. Luckily, with a couple of pretty great performances, Germany was able to take the win. But this match really didn't inspire confidence. It seemed like people had way overestimated the team's ability. And sadly, it seemed like Whitecat's ability to change the team was at the center of that. Because while he'd played quite well, he certainly hadn't revolutionized the team, or even seemed to make much of a difference at all. Germany would have their first match against one of the top teams, when in the quarterfinals they would play South Korea, the previous year's 2nd place finishers, and this year's 5th seed. South Korea had started the tournament looking quite shaky, but in their last match had pulled it together pretty well, which meant that Germany was going to have to play much, much better to even stand a chance against them. And that they most certainly did.
Oh, there he goes. Karuna.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, he has no time, and there's... Yeah.
He has to cover quite a lot for that get that roll. And here's the game. Wow. Over for a million points.
The return fire here. Make it 2-1. Germany. Go up to a 3-1 lead over South Korea. And it'll be Okinamo dropping.
Oh.
And that is going to do it. Korea putting another point on the board. Rising will miss along with Smarty at the end. Hello Watcher and Whitecat doing what they do. Alas, to no avail. Korea with 2 FCs. Oh,
Enough?
Germany is able to survive. And that'll be 5-3. Match point Germany.
Super. South Korea. But Germany did at least try to match it with a hard round. Okay, the match is going spicy.
Yeah, unless Dusteister Hollow Watcher miss, I think Korea. Oh, Hollow will drop though! What? And Dusteister, they both drop! The double miss! Korea, wait! Why can't this?
Is it enough?
It's not enough! No! It's not enough time! Germany will take the win! 6-4.
Wow.
They were looking way better this match, and Whitecat and Okinamo started standing out a lot more. And this match made it especially clear what Germany was going to be strong on, and what they weren't going to be. Since when it came to jump aim and flow aim, they were very, very strong, with Whitecat, Justice, and Neox all being some of the best aim players in the tournament. And on top of this, with Okinamo on their team, along with Whitecat and Justice, they had a team that was ridiculously strong on speed. But when it came to a lot of the hidden and alternating picks, South Korea was clearly much, much stronger. But despite this, Germany was able to win one of South Korea's picks while not losing any of theirs, and take a 6-4 win. After just scraping by with the last two matches, Germany would come face to face with the United States. There was a ridiculous amount of hype going into this match, as no team had even been able to take more than 2 points off the US. And honestly, the tournament was starting to look a lot like OWC 2019. And no one wanted another 7-0 final. And as underdogs, Germany had a crazy amount of support going into the match. They were going to be the ones to give the US the run for their money. And they were the ones who were going to make an interesting finals match. And with over 10,000 viewers, Germany would face off against the United States.
But man, the United States just 6-0'd Germany like it was nothing in about half an hour.
This match honestly hurt. The US had technically beaten Germany by more than the 32nd seed. But what had really happened was that the US had practiced way more, expecting to play, well, a much better team. Like, Germany didn't look bad at all. They actually played well enough that they probably would have beaten either of the other two teams in the semifinals. But if they even wanted to make the US try, they'd have to do significantly better. There was one positive takeaway from this match though, and that was that Whitecat was actually really good at tournaments. Like, before this he looked like a very solid part of the team, but here he was pretty dominant, being the only player who really looked like he might be able to give the US a run for their money. He top scored on more than half of the maps, which almost makes this loss a bit sadder, since it made it clear that Whitecat alone wouldn't be enough to take even a single point off of the US. And that's because no matter what he did, Vaxay alone could beat every single one of his scores. It didn't really matter if he was one of the best players in the match, when the US had so many different people of the same caliber. And with this, the German team would be sent to losers. But this match would also result in a lot of toxicity towards the German team. There had been a lot of, frankly, unfair expectations put on the German team that were clearly not able to be met. And now a lot of people were forcing their disappointment about how boring OWC would be onto the German team. And so, after one of the most tragic tournament matches ever, Germany would move on to the losers bracket. This match went about as expected. It was a solid win where both teams played about how you'd think they would. Although it would have been nice to see a bit more of a blowout after that last match. Japan had been on a ridiculous run, beating the 6th seed Russia, and then after being kicked down to losers by Canada, they beat the 9th seed Brazil. And now they came to face Germany, where there would be another very close match.
On the double S, Varvalian with, I think, a 1x100 and Hyphen holding on to his FC as well. Ombre drops his combo, roll pan as well, but it's just Whitecat now left to fend for Germany. Varvalian finds a slider break, but there's still two FCs on the Japanese side, Delis and Hyphen, wanting to pull this through.
Germany left.
Down the last quarter, it's all up to Whitecat now. If Hyphen and Delis find breaks, it could go over to Germany, but it's not looking likely at this point. The score lead is not that high. Hyphen finds his break. Delis finds a break as well. It's just Whitecat. Can he pull it back over in time? About an eighth of the map left, but he needs the full combo the rest of this map in order to take it. And the score gap is going over in favor of Germany. I think it's over.
Whitecat, man, he's actually doing it. On his own back. With Rising as well, recovering. Wow, Whitecat, when you need him most. The #1 in the world. Showing why is there. Incredible carry performance from Whitecat there.
This was way too close for Germany to feel comfortable. It was an extremely back and forth match, despite them playing the 11th seed. And seeing as they were facing Canada next, who was the #2 seed, a defeat before even reaching the grand finals was seeming increasingly likely. This was what would really set the tone for the final match of the OSU World Cup, when after barely scraping by for an entire tournament, Germany would turn around and do this to the #2 seed.
It's quite incredible.
I don't think anyone came in expecting a sweep for either direction, regardless of who won. I think most people thought this would be a pretty closely fought match, but Germany has just outperformed expectations. They have outperformed Canada by a ridiculous margin on almost every single map. You know, the Hard Rock one being that close pick, but other than that, this has been all Germany all the time. Losers bracket, final speed run, any percent. 7-0 Germany is going to be the final result. They will be advancing onward to their first ever grand finals of the OS World Cup. Well done.
Canada was definitely off this day, but a 7-0, and especially one where they seemed extremely solid, gave at least the tiniest spark of hope that maybe they could get a point, or even 2, on the US. And with this little glint of hope, the grand finals would begin. USA versus Germany. The big game, and the one that people were pretty sure would be boring as hell. The vast majority of people were expecting a repeat from the last year, with the US only getting stronger as the pools got harder, causing another extremely boring grand finals. But on this day, I don't know what got into them, but Germany was not going to go down that easily.
Germany trying to hold on to their opening pick. This is massive for them. They need this. Okinawa's down and the US flip it! And the break! Can they keep it? Clutch break point from the United States. Germany just could not hold on.
This is the United States' pick. Not surprising, Vaxay does break at the end, but unfortunately not enough time. 300,000 score lead, and Germany just doesn't have the combo on this last slider. This is in Germany's favor very heavily right now. Combo advantage for neither team. Germany get themselves on the board 2-1 early. This is the start that I think they are looking for under the United States. Vaxay's starting to build something up here, but as area breaks, it doesn't matter. At the ending is Okinawa trades.
This was just a really good pick for the United States. This is the type of map that I think they were always going to be favored on against this Germany roster.
Here they come, Fancy Light is down!
The United States is falling apart in the last couple seconds of the map. There is time for Germany.
There's a small window of opportunity for Germany. Fiery does go down as well. That's going to complete the quad miss. Germany now will storm back in it. Neox leading the charge with Whitecat. And Germany will pull through on their second point.
This was an absolutely insane pick from Germany.
The captain of the US roster. No, he won't!
That last little wiggle is so tricky. I've seen a couple people break there in practice, and Fancy suffers the same fate. But
so this is a very dangerous situation. We see Vaxay or Neos miss, and there goes Vaxay, and that's going to seal it at the end. Germany take the third.
Germany are running with this 4-3.
Better performance despite that late break from Ari. Vaxay looking like he will in fact pull off the FC.
And he will.
He has arrived. Ladies and gentlemen, Vaxay is here. But Fancy Light finds a break.
It's just Kablaze. Kablaze for the United States is holding on. The score lead goes in the favor of the United States.
It's Kablaze. Kablaze goes down. Smarty and Hallow now. It's on Smarty and Hallow. Quarter of the map left.
Hallow Watcher, the best hard rock player for Germany, finds a break. It's just on Smarty, the new blood for Germany here. He's going to hold it into the finish here. There's no combos in the United States besides Ryu. Maybe it's going to be enough. Germany! Are they going to hold it? Smarty has the FC into the ending. Smarty cannot find a break into the ending of the map here.
Hallow
He's going to hold. Hallow Watcher breaks.
Smarty holds it.
Holding through the last couple wiggles here. Big jumps into the ending. He misses the wiggle. That's such a hard pattern to hit.
Just like Fancy Lad, he comes up a little bit short, but a brilliant score nonetheless.
It's Whitecat versus Vaxay. There's backing combo for the United States. They have Rectigon and Fancy Lad. No, Fancy Lad's gone. But if Vaxay and Swaggy Swagster can hold on, another 2 breaks from Dust Ice and Umbre. There might just be enough time.
Whitecat has to hold on. They need to see a break from the United States.
Whitecat.
It's the last couple of seconds of the map.
And Whitecat.
It's flying. It's going slowly, but not fast enough.
Whitecat's gonna do it.
And hold some sort of combo.
There's no time.
They've done enough.
They've done plenty.
We're going to tiebreak.
We're going to see a tiebreak. United States reigning champions have run almost undefeated, and Germany, coming undefeated from the losers bracket, is going to drag them to tiebreaker, taking the break point by a significant amount here. Of this tournament, on Reddit, in chat, in servers, everybody has been saying that the United States is going to be an inevitable stop in grand finals. Well, who is laughing now? Germany is. That's who's laughing.
Vaxay, the ultimate final boss of OSU tournament play. You know him. You know what he's capable of, and he's putting in that performance. He finally breaks, but that 700 combo was so big. There's no combo anywhere. 220 on Swaggy Swagster is now gone. There's no combo on a single player. 150 is the biggest combo anywhere.
The US running away. They're checking out.
The United States.
There's so many misses.
Okay, now the breaks. It's just Dust Ice versus Kablaze right now. It doesn't do anything for Germany. Kablaze is just maintaining the lead that the United States already had to make it work. But as long as Vaxley holds, it doesn't matter. Kablaze is backing him up. Fancy Lad is backing.
There's resets on Germany. There's Rising and Dust Ice breaking. That just did it. I'm fairly sure.
2020 OSU World Cup champions. Once again, the United States of America.
What a performance! What a map! What a match! The final margin of victory, 110,000 points, so close from start to finish. But those combos from the United States, just keeping them ahead the whole way. Vaxe, Kablaze, Fancy Lad, and Swaggy Swagster all taking turns, just keeping the United States.
What on earth? Whitecat looked like an entirely different player in this match. Like, he legit went from being good in the last couple of matches to competing with Vaxe on a grand finals pool. It was sort of expected that hard pools would be where he'd do his best, but giving that kind of a performance in your first tournament ever in front of 26,000 people was frankly ridiculous. If anyone was doubting the skill of both the German team and Whitecat, this set the record pretty damn straight. Not taking home a win or even a bracket reset would have been pretty sad against any other team, but Germany's performance here was one of the biggest surprises in OWC history. They just played different. And it's not a stretch to say that Germany played the best any OWC team ever had in a finals pool, besides the 2020 United States team. That's how ridiculous these two teams were. And most importantly to our story, it made it clear that Whitecat was a ridiculously good person to have on a tournament team. Now, I don't entirely want to say that he'd be one of the best tournament players in general, because he definitely has some very big weaknesses, but clearly when it came down to his strengths, he stood alone. And with this ridiculous climax, 2020 would conclude. If 2019 was the year where Whitecat proved his farming ability to be by far the best in the game, 2020 was the year that he proved that he was far more than that. His aim was not only the best the game had ever seen by a mile and then some, but he was also both inhumanly versatile and adaptable. Scores like Logical Stimulus and him learning 220 and S-ranking Yomiuri proved that he really was a singular player who had and would continue to change the game, which would only make what would happen after OWC more disappointing. Yeah, I'm not sure if you've noticed this part, but Whitecat is currently not very active, and it's been that way since about the end of 2020. He's basically just taking a break. He's mentioned multiple times that while he still enjoys the game, he's lost a lot of motivation, which seems pretty reasonable. As after he played a bit less, his aim clearly rusted, and without a large amount of dedication, he's never really going to get it back. This also makes most sense why he didn't contest MREC for the #1 spot. When Whitecat first came crashing through the rankings, it seemed like his 3-mod ability would always be the most special aspect of his play. But with hindsight, it's become increasingly clear that the other aspects of it were just as, or even more important. On the no-mod side, he has like the majority of the most impressive aim scores. And I know the Shige comparison sucks, but he was also the first person to be able to compete with him on a lot of his most legendary scores. Yomiuri, Logical Stimulus, Burn This Moment into the Retina of My Eye, and High Score are just a few, where he set himself apart not only with his aim, but also his accuracy. He also still sets himself apart when it comes to things like Hidden Hard Rock Game, with scores like Niji no Conquistador, where he got the first FC and the first Hidden Hard Rock FC on the same score. That's not normal, and it never will be. Which is why, even in a post-MREC era, there's something really special about Whitecat, and his run during one of the best single years in OSU history. And yes, all of this really happened in just 1 year. And oh boy was it ridiculous. Down barriers that every established player had at the time, changing the way maps were farmed, ending the longest curse in OSU history, and having one of the best grand final performances ever in OWC. And in the end, it really does make you wonder what the game would look like without his ban, and most of all, what it would look like without his unban. But the clearest answer to both of these is that it most certainly would not be the same. Because whether you like it or not, Whitecat has changed OSU forever. And as the reign of the most dominant player to ever touch OSU ends, it's easy to look over just how different a game we're in than when he first started. And after all this, I think that's pretty awesome.